resources that address any questions that are asked at the end or topics that we're unable to cover today. I also want to say this is the first time that we've offered this webinar, so there might be pieces that I'm missing, or you might have some suggestions that you want to offer, and we welcome you to do that at the end of the webinar. So a few things before we get started. We're hoping that live captions are available, but last I checked, we did not have a captioner in the webinar, so I apologize if they are not available. The recording will be captioned, which will hopefully address part of that problem, but is not an ideal situation for right now. So hopefully we'll be able to kind of keep you posted on if we get a captioner in the room or not. So, okay, it looks like the captioner just arrived. So captions are available at a bit.ly link, bit.ly/SBCTC live, and that's all lowercase. And Monique has posted the link in the chat. Again, there's a call-in option available if your computer audio is acting up, or you can turn on those live captions, which can always be helpful as well. And for any troubleshooting, please contact Monique either through the chat, or her email is mbelair, BELAIR, @sbctc.edu. And thanks in advance for Monique, or to Monique. She's doing an awesome job kind of keeping up with all of this. And again, she's monitoring the chat and collecting questions as they come in, and we'll address those at the end. So please keep that in mind. And then I think, Monique, we're ready to roll if you want to press record. I think we are recording. Awesome. So I just wanted to start by talking about some general principles when it comes to PowerPoint accessibility, and then we'll dive into more of kind of the menu items, some of the tools here in PowerPoint to actually make an accessible PowerPoint. So the first thing that's important is to use unique slide titles, and that's so that someone can navigate through the PowerPoint using the title of each slide. And we'll look at kind of where that becomes most important. Another big piece is ensuring good color contrast. I'm sure we've all witnessed PowerPoint presentations where the background color and the font color are such that it's really hard to read. So you want to make sure you have good contrast. I tend to default with just black and white, or using really dark colors if I'm going to add colors in. And then also just using, large font. And part of this is thinking about if you're going to be presenting on, a big screen, making sure it's large enough that people in the back of the room can also read the slide. So sometimes it's playing around a bit to see kind of is it sufficient in terms of the font size. I also recommend that you avoid timed presentations, because we all take a different amount of time to read through text. And so when you time it, you might be disadvantaging someone who just needs more time to read through. And then also keep transitions simple. So if you're adding in animations between slides, don't go too fancy and funky. Keep it really simple if you use them at all. Part of that is you don't want something that might involve flashing that could be seizure-inducing. So, as with most lessons that we kind of talk about with accessibility, kind of clean and simple is usually the best approach, and that's especially so with PowerPoint. So you don't want to clutter up the slide. Sometimes we learn about new tools and kind of options in PowerPoint, and it's exciting to use them, but it can also lead to a really kind of distracting experience. And frankly, it can just be tacky. So we'll kind of walk through some different approaches with PowerPoint. And I'm going to try really hard to make sure that we have time at the end for questions, because I know I'm not going to cover everything in the prepared presentation here. But the first thing that's most important when making a PowerPoint is to use the layout template. And the issue is, when last week we went through a Word document, and headings were the most important piece, hopefully, that you came away with. You want to use those headings so that people can navigate section by section. Well, in PowerPoint, we don't really have headings. Instead, we have layout templates. And those templates help dictate the order in which the information is read. So to access the different layout templates, you want to be on the Home tab, which is, if you're using keyboard commands, Alt-H. And you select Layout. Just click on L from there. And hopefully, if my screen's large enough, you can see, or when you kind of click through, there's a variety of different layout options. And so there's the title slide, which is going to have a box for the title of your presentation and then a subtitle. So in this case, I put my name as the subtitle. The most commonly used layout is just the title and content. And so again, we have, that's the current layout that I'm using. That's the one that's shaded. But if you wanted kind of 2 content boxes, you could select 2 content. Or if you're doing comparison and you needed a title for each content box, then you could select comparison. There's also option for title only or blank. And then there's content with caption, picture with caption. And these are just kind of the default layouts that are available in PowerPoint. I am going to show you how to create your own, because I think this is one of the biggest problems with PowerPoint and the way that it might get misused is that sometimes these layout options don't work. And so people start kind of plugging in additional text boxes as needed. And that can be problematic in terms of the read order. So when you go through the PowerPoint, that text box might not be read in the correct order, but it also might get left out entirely. So we can modify these layout templates to fit our needs, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I was mentioning read order, and let's just talk about kind of what I mean by read order. And again, that's if someone's using assistive technology, it's going to be the order in which the items on the slide are read, or the way in which you can navigate through. And in order to check or modify the read order, you're going to you stay on the Home tab. I've got Alt-H, and I'm going to go over to the Drawing group and select Arrange, which is G, and I'm going to open the selection pane. And I'm just navigating through keyboard right now, so I'm going to select P. And what you can see, and it's probably really hard to see, the contrast isn't very good, honestly, is that my selection pane reads Content Placeholder 2 and then Title 1. And this is in the correct order because, and this is what's really important to remember, is that it reads through it from bottom to top. So you don't, most of us think when we're looking at a list that we're going to read from top down. And in this case, it's the opposite. And in part, that's just how we layer things in PowerPoint. And so you think of kind of that first layer. The first thing that's kind of read is going to be the title. And then the item that's placed on top of it, that next layer, is going to be the content. And another way that you can check that read order is if you just navigate to the slide. So in this case, I'm clicking anywhere, but I'm not selecting any of the, the title box or the content box. And when I press Tab, I'm first taken to the title, and then I'm taken to the content box. So that's another way to check read order, is to tab through and see the order in which things are read. And then you can use the selection pane to change the read order. So if you add something in and it needs to be read before the content, you can just drag and drop it to change the read order. Or another option is when you're on a content item, let me see if I can do it from here. I can't do it on here. Sorry, I'm not on my actual computer. I'm on a different one, so it's looking a little different. But sometimes I think if you're on a Mac maybe, when you right-click on the content box, you can select to bring forward or bring back. And again, that's kind of, realigning those layers. So putting something backwards means it's going to be read earlier. Bringing it forward means it's going to be one of the last items to be read. So I hope that makes sense. I see people get hung up on that a lot, but the most important piece is to remember that when you're looking at how items are arranged, it's bottom to top or back to front, depending on which version you're working with. And what I wanted to show, this next slide is the slide that was just created with text boxes. And in the selection pane, it reads text box 3, text box 4, smiley face. I've got a smiley face plugged onto the page. But more importantly, I'm going to hop over to the View tab, which is, oh goodness, it's going to be Alt-W. And then I'm going to select Outline View. And that opens up kind of a nice navigation pane that puts all of your text content into an outline mode. So again, it's just a really great way to look over your content and really think about what it would be to navigate your PowerPoint if it was text only. And what we see is I'm on slide 6, and it is totally blank. So if I'm looking at outline view, I receive no information at all on this slide, and that's because the slide was created with text boxes. So I'm going to go back to the Home tab, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply the layout to the slide in order to fix it. And what I'll end up having to do is kind of removing these text boxes and pasting the text into the content boxes, which isn't, it doesn't take a horrible amount of time, but it's not ideal. But now when I look at, the outline pane, that information is actually conveyed, which is really nice. So navigation-wise, again, you've got the slide title, which is important, so that people know what's on that slide. Is that the slide that they want to get to or not? I have the smiley face here in part to show that shapes aren't going to show up. They're a graphic, and just like images in PowerPoint, you need to add alt text. Oh, wait, look at this. Look at the selection pane now. Now it's reading smiley face, title 1, content placeholder. So again, depends on if you want that shape read first or not. You might want to rearrange it. So any graphics in PowerPoint, whether it's an image or a shape or the smart art, so you can convert text to smart art, which are just different graphics and whatnot. You want to add alt text too. And if you're doing smart art, then again, you can see how that text is conveyed using the text pane for the Smart Art. And that's just, again, a really great way to ensure that all of the text is reading at the appropriate levels. I personally don't use Smart Art, so I'm not super familiar with it, but from my understanding, using this text pane to insert content is supposed to be the best way to ensure that you're not adding text that might be skipped over. So we'll close out of that. And I'm going to go back to normal view, which is a little bit easier for me. That's what I'm used to, and close out the selection pane. So hopefully you understand, again, why we would want to use the layout template under the Home tab. But let's talk about what to do if there's not a layout template for the type of layout that you need. And this is kind of a cool feature. It's not one that I've played around with too much because I'm not a heavy PowerPoint user. But just as last week we talked about how you can modify the headings in Word, which saves you a lot of time, you can do the same in PowerPoint. And the way that you do that is by editing the master, so the slide master. So we're going to go back to View, Alt-W, and I'm going to select Slide Master. And that takes me into the space where I can adjust kind of that default style, that look in PowerPoint. So right now I'm going to edit the title portion. If you know me, you know that I prefer Century Gothic. Let's go ahead, let's change the color just so it's something that we can kind of track. We're going to make it dark blue. Looking at kind of how the text gets smaller, the kind of level it is, I think it gets a little too small. So I'm going to bump up the text sizes a little bit. And again, maybe just so it's a little bit easier to track, I'm going to make it all dark green. I think we still have pretty good contrast here. And again, you can go through, you can edit each one as you see fit. And then what you can also do, I'm going to go back to Slide Master, is you can insert a new layout. And you can see it defaults to have that title because, again, if you're navigating through, you need to know the title of each slide to know if that's the one that you want to get to. But there's also, under the master layout group, you can insert different types of placeholders. And this is, you know, if you're using, you know, tables a lot, then maybe you're going to insert a section for tables, and that way when someone clicks on the table, it's one less step, right? It makes it a little bit quicker in order to input information. You can also, you know, specify that there should be a picture, and so you have a picture placeholder. Notice there's also the date, the footer, and page number placeholders are already in there. You can remove those if you want. And so that's essentially how you can kind of create whatever layout you need. Again, I oftentimes see people are adding text boxes because maybe they want, you know, three sections of text. So we'll go through. Make a slide with 3 text sections. There we go. So now we have a new layout style that you can then save and pull from rather than having to add a text box that you might worry about getting lost or messing up the read order. So this can be tricky. When I first used this, I thought I lost my presentation entirely, but right now all of the kind of formatting options are specific to the master slides. So to get back to your presentation, you select Close Master View, and we're back to our presentation, and look at that. My title is now blue and it's Century Gothic. My text is, I think, a little bit larger and dark green, and those changes ripple through the entire presentation. Whereas, you know, before, when I didn't know that I could make those changes to the master, I would go through each slide individually and make those changes, and that was eating up a lot of time. So again, kind of fixing those masters and creating a layout that works for you rather than plugging in kind of excess text boxes not only kind of improves accessibility of the PowerPoint, but it saves you time in the long run. So win-win all around. All right. The next piece is alt text for images. And just as with Word, you want to make sure that you have alt text for your image. And again, this slide, I kind of made a note of look at the layout. When I check the slide layout, I have two content items. So my image is, you know, part of the slide. It's not added in separately or kind of tagged on, but I use the layout in order to have text in one content box and then an image in the second content box. And to add the alt text, it's pretty much the same as what we did in Word. So you can right-click on the image or select Shift F10 and then the letter O, or select Format Picture. And alt text is nested under the Size and Properties tab. And once again, you want to enter the alt text into the description and not the title field. So we have here, so it's an image of a cat kind of stuck in some window blinds. My cat climbs the curtains. I don't have any blinds, but pretty horrific looking. And then we've got alt text for that image. So again, same process as in Word. Right-click on the image or Shift F10, and then navigate to Format Picture. And the alt text field is under the Image Size and Properties tab. So you can keep the alt text, you know, short and sweet, and then you're good. I did want to talk a bit about background images because I think that's also one area where people might not be aware of some of the tools available to kind of add in logos and stuff like that. Basically kind of images that I don't think need to be read at all. They're purely decorative. And so this is, you know, we just recently rebranded at the state board. We have some new fancy graphics that I like to include if I'm doing presentations. And in this case, I just pasted the image in. So for viewers, you know, it looks nice. It looks like it's part of the slide, but the reality is, I'm going to go back to that selection pane. You know, I've got my title, my content placeholder, and then the picture. And honestly, I don't need assistive technology to read that image. It's simply, you know, a decorative graphic. So we could do null alt text, but what I'd rather do is just not even have that image on the slide. I'd rather it be a background. So I'm going to walk through kind of my workflow for how I make that happen. But basically what it involves is formatting the background. And you do that through the Design tab. And sorry, I've got my WebEx notes are covering up some of my menu items, so bear with me a little bit. So I'm in the Design tab, and I'm going to Format Background, which the keyboard shortcut is F. And here's where you can change the color of the background if you want. I'm not going to do that. But you can upload a picture and make that a background. So I'm just going to walk through kind of how I do that. I'm going to create a new slide. It's just going to be a blank slide. You copy, so I'll cut the image. I'm going to paste it onto the slide where I want. And so this is just a blank image here. And, oh gosh. Let me, go figure, I'm not on my computer, and so I don't know if I'm going to be able to snag the screenshot that I want. There we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm taking a screenshot of that blank slide, and I'm going to just save it as slide background on my computer. And then I'm going to go to my slide, and now let's edit that background. So the Design tab, Format Background, I'm going to upload a picture. And the reason I take a picture of the full slide is if it was just that image, it would spread across the entire slide. And I'll show you what I mean. So if I'm just uploading that graphic, it just covers the entire slide, makes for a really bad experience. You can't see the text against the graphic. And I've not found a way to kind of control the image in the way that I would like. So rather than upload that image itself, again, I kind of take a picture and essentially make the slide, make a picture of what I want the slide to look like. And that's given me a little bit more control. And that way the graphic is just part of the background. It's not a content item. So that when I look at the selection pane, I just have title and my content placeholder. That image doesn't get in the way of anything. So if you find yourself adding graphics for decoration, for branding purposes, you've got logos and stuff like that, I would encourage you to just create kind of that background image and upload it into the background so that it's not cluttering up the amount of content on your slide. It also just helps to ensure that it's consistent across those slides when you do that. So, and then I have, the slide I used to make the image. I'm just going to delete that out, and it's gone. So there we go. So that's one thing I wanted to point out, because again, I think it's a common way that I see PowerPoint kind of misused. And we all work for agencies that like us to use the style guides and branding and whatnot. So that's one way to kind of work that in, again, without messing up the content of the slide. Okay, I think I've made that point about 6 times now. So the next thing I want to point out is that just like Word, there's a lot of different tools in PowerPoint that you can use when it comes to spacing and creating lists and columns and everything. So default text boxes, not text boxes, but those content text placeholders is a bulleted list. And you can, eliminate the bullets if you want, or add them in, or, change the look of them, make them numbered lists instead. And so, again, you just want to use those tools that are available in the Home tab, so that way assistive technology, I think last time we talked about the importance of lists, it tells the user how many items are in the list. Sighted users can scan and see how many items, but when you make it a proper list, the assistive technology will help contextualize the size of the list. You can also alter the spacing just as you can in Word, and change the layout options. You can also, there's a columns option in PowerPoint, and so you can make things into columns, and that's kind of nice because then it'll make the text a little bit larger. So PowerPoint will oftentimes automatically adjust the size of the text depending on how much content you're putting in. And that's one thing people will say, I can't make the text larger because I have too much content. And in that case, I say, you need to spread it over multiple slides then. Try not to put too much information in one slide, and be comfortable spreading information out across slides if you have to. But again, there's a lot of different tools to move text around and give you kind of the look and feel that you want when designing a PowerPoint. And as with most tools, as long as you're using the tools that are, as with most programs, as long as you're using the tools that are given to you, you're typically doing good when it comes to accessibility. It's when we start adding things in and kind of manually formatting things and moving things around, by adding in a bunch of blank lines or spaces, that we start running into problems. So this is just that reminder to use the tools available. And then I also wanted to talk about some tips when it comes to actually giving your presentation, because typically we don't create PowerPoints and just leave them on their own to be read through, though sometimes we do. If you're actually presenting, please don't put yourself in a situation where you're telling your audience to read the slide, because you're making an assumption that everyone can see the slide and read it, and not everyone can. I know if I'm not in the first couple of rows of a presentation, I typically struggle to read slides. So when you are presenting and you're using PowerPoint as your visual, read the information that's on the slide. Don't ask your audience to read the slides to themselves. And with that, describe the images that you have on the slide. So if you're presenting a graphic, make sure that you're kind of capturing that in your narration, so that everyone is aware of the information being conveyed. It always just kind of irks me when people are presenting and they don't capture that. So I always, if you're preparing for a presentation, you're writing out your script, include some information that provides an audio supplement to what's visibly on the slides. And then also, sometimes people are using PowerPoint to make videos. And in that case, I just recommend leave a little bit of space at the bottom of the PowerPoint slide, so that if you're going to turn it to video, then you're going to caption that video, I hope. And it just helps to ensure that the closed captions aren't going to cover up text that's on the slide. So that's just a pointer if we've got faculty out there who might be making video lectures. I like to kind of try and keep that bottom space clean. And then I also want to address Zen PowerPoints. A colleague recently made a really great PowerPoint presentation for a presentation we're giving around the state, and it takes more of the Zen approach, where you just have images, and you're talking. You're providing kind of the background to the image. And it's kind of, it looks like this. I'm giving you tips for presentations. And so that image is really just there to reinforce what you're saying. But again, people like to have a copy of the PowerPoint afterwards. And in this case, there's multiple people that are giving that presentation. So knowing what each image conveys and what we're supposed to say on that slide is kind of important. And so one of the tricks that I found for cases like this is essentially to hide the text so that I can still send this PowerPoint out. Someone using assistive technology can still get some information even though it looks like a purely visual slide. And I'm going to pop back over into view and the outline view. And notice I'm on the slide where there's just an image of a guy giving a presentation. But in outline view, it's repeating the previous slide, which was titled Presentation Tips. And, I have these bullet points. Don't ask your audience to read the slides to themselves. Describe images on the slides. If recording a video, leave space for captions. And then it says then PowerPoint. Hide the title and text behind the image. So what I want to show, if I move this image, you can actually see that the slide title is present and there's the content that I'm providing my audience is also provided in text. But for that actual presentation piece, the visual element, I can just cover that up with the image. That doesn't do anything you can see in outline view, it doesn't do anything to alter the slide title or the text. It's just a giant image. That layer covers the others, but it doesn't mess them up in any way. So that way, if someone's using assistive technology, they're still going to be able to navigate by slide title, and they're going to receive kind of the text and the textual component that you're trying to convey with the image. So that's an option for those who like to go the more Zen PowerPoint approach. There's some other design approaches. In this case, for this image, or excuse me, for this slide, we have the same image that was used, a guy standing at a podium giving a presentation. The title is present. It says presentation tips, and then we have our bullet points, which I just simplified. Read the text on the slides, describe images and graphics, leave space for captions, and it says simplicity can still accommodate text. So what I did in this case, I uploaded the image as a background image. And so I opened the selection pane. That image is not present, it's not even acknowledged. Instead, we just have the title and the content placeholder. And I just modified those shapes. So you can shift F10 and then format shape. And I did a solid fill of white since it's on kind of a darker the background image is a bit darker. I added a little bit of transparency, but not too much to kind of mess with the contrast between the box and the text. And I also, with the background image, I added a little bit of transparency as well. I thought it just gave it a softer look so that the image is a little bit more of a background. So there's some ways that you can kind of play around with images and still keep your PowerPoint, visually appealing and kind of heavy in terms of imagery without sacrificing having that text component, because text is always going to be your most accessible format. So those are just a couple of options for people who really want to keep that kind of heavy imagery to their PowerPoint, of working the images in without cluttering up the amount of content on your slide. So next, a lot of people, again, if you're not getting that kind of involved in creating background images, a lot of us use the different themes that are under the Design tab to give our PowerPoints a little bit more kind of visual appeal. And with these themes, you can edit them, you can change up the look. The most important thing when using themes or selecting themes is, again, just ensuring that you have good color contrast. And unfortunately, not all of the themes ensure that. Oh gosh, I just hovered over a theme and you can see it, maybe you can't see, but it'd be really hard probably for most of you to see that it made my font really tiny. And everything is this kind of like lime green color, which contrast-wise is terrible. But you know what? I really like the border that it gives my slide. So I'm going to go with this theme. But let's edit the theme. And that's where you've got, under the Design tab, we've got themes, and then we have variants. And the variants is where you can, again, kind of adjust some of those colors to make it a little bit better. But you can also select from more color palettes than are displayed. And you can do some custom color palettes. And this is good, again, for branding, but also just to adjust the colors so that you can ensure that there's sufficient color contrast. And so I'm just going through trying to pick out, you know, some of the darker colors in order to improve the contrast there. So again, there's a lot of different themes, but Microsoft doesn't always do the best job at ensuring that you've got good color contrast. So I wanted to point out that there you can kind of get some control in fixing that. And again, editing the slide master could be one approach of just ensuring that the fonts are large enough. But just try to be mindful of that. Microsoft isn't always on your side when it comes to accessibility. There's a lot of these that are just terrible. And they've made the font so tiny. So be mindful of that. And then just like Word, PowerPoint has an accessibility checker under the File tab. We navigate to Check for Issues and check accessibility. Let's see what problems it pulled up. So it's telling us for the smiley face that was inserted early on that it's missing alt text. So again, thinking about any time you add a shape, you're going to want to add alt text to it just as you would with an image. And it's the same process that, you know, format shape, and then add alt text. In general, I would avoid adding shapes to PowerPoints. Again, I think it just clutters things up. You can do the null alt text just as you would in Word, which is that space enter. But remember, it's not, the checker isn't going to register that as appropriate. So sometimes you have to be smarter than the machine. But I'm just smiley face here. And then let's see. Oh, I've got it's calling out duplicate slide titles. So I have 3 slides with the same exact title. And PowerPoint is, you know, recommending that you have unique slide titles. So, you know, we could add continued. If there's a second slide, you're kind of carrying information across multiple slides, might say presentation tips continued, or, you know, do 2, and then on the third slide, we could add 3 to the title. You know, you can alter some things there to make sure that you've got some unique slide titles. What might be really nice here actually is kind of, you know, doing 3 of 3 presentation tips, 1 of 3 presentation tips, 2 of 3 presentation tips, 3 of 3. And that just kind of contextualizes it from that first slide, that the information presented on the next 3 slides is all kind of a package deal, which could be great for all users. And then I'm also being told to check the read order on slide 6. Remember, that was the slide where it was made of text boxes, and it's also because I inserted a shape. And it's calling it out because I've inserted items outside of the slide layout. And so it's kind of saying, hey, you need to go in, you need to double check the read order to make sure that things are going to be read in the appropriate order. And it's going to say that anytime you insert content outside of the layout template that you've selected. So even this example of the Zen PowerPoint where I put the image on top of all of the text, the layout is title and content, and the picture itself is just layered on top. It's not part of the slide layout. So you could, you know, use picture with caption maybe instead. And that way it's, again, I'm not using it in the same way, so I don't know if it's that beneficial, but you'll get called out if you're using content that exists outside of those layout templates. So, so that's the trick with the accessibility checker. And just like with Word, there's going to be some things it catches, some that it doesn't. It's not going to call out poor color contrast. That's something you need to kind of be mindful of on your own. So that is the overview of PowerPoint accessibility. I'm going to pop over to the questions that Monique's been collecting and see if we can address any of those. So with smart shapes, again, it's not something I'm super familiar with. The first question is, I recently edited a PowerPoint presentation with smart shapes, and how does that affect accessibility? I'm not super familiar with, but I will try to find some materials. Microsoft has a lot of tutorials on this that I'll send you, or you can always Google Smart Shapes PowerPoint accessibility and see what comes up. Typically with stuff like this, any type of shape or smart art, you want to make sure that you add alt text, and it's going to be the same as you would with images. And let's go back to the slide with an image where you right-click, or if you're using keyboard commands, Shift F10, click Format Picture. On the keyboard, that's the letter O. And under size, is it size and properties, is the alt text option. And so it's, you type in that quick description. And with that, alt text, smart art, all of that, it's not going to show up in the outline view. The outline view is a text representation of your PowerPoint. It doesn't carry over the alt text for those pieces, but assistive tech can still navigate to them. It's just not going to display an outline view. So with text boxes, you can add them. They won't show up in outline view, but you see, insert text box, they'll show up, a text box will show up in your slide. It'll show up at the end because that's just kind of how it's layered on, and so you can alter the order in which it's read. But I've heard of cases where the text box doesn't transfer over, where it might get kind of skipped over by certain assistive technology. Again, I'm not a screen reader user, so I can't speak for that from experience, but I've just heard of there sometimes being issues if you are kind of adding in a bunch of text boxes. So in this case, I think it's recommended to use to kind of do a custom layout. If you're not able to insert the amount of content that you need to using the default layout and you're adding in a bunch of text boxes, just edit that slide master. Create a layout that works for you just to ensure that that content comes over correctly. Okay, and then there was a question, what happens with a screen reader when you close the eye icon next to an image in the selection pane? I do not know. I'm not certain. I close it. It looks like it hides an element. I'm not certain why you would want to do that. I guess if you wanted some hidden text in there, or you wanted to be able to leave the title but not make it visible in the presentation, that seems to be what it's doing. I'm not a PowerPoint expert, but I'm not sure what that does for assistive technology. And then the next question was, do those slide master changes affect just this presentation or all future presentations? So for this one, it would affect this presentation, but there is a way to save the design template if you want, and I'll send that information out. Again, PowerPoint's not my tool of choice, so I'll forward along the information for you super users once we send out the recording. And then what is the purpose of title and the size and position on the picture for the alt text? That's just something Microsoft does. They have you put the title as kind of a quick description, and then the description below as more descriptive. But Microsoft is the only one that does that, so my understanding is they're phasing out the title field and just leaving the description. And then there was a question about regarding not asking your audience to read the slide. Is it okay to paraphrase what's on the slide, or does it need to be read verbatim? Yeah, I think it's okay to paraphrase as long as you're, presenting the same information. No one likes a presenter that gets up and reads verbatim from the slide. In general, I think of PowerPoints as, short and sweet phrases to kind of keep you on track and to reinforce certain points, but not full sentences and not, the script, so to speak. So I think it's fine to paraphrase what's there as long as the same information is being conveyed. And then there was a question, will a screen reader read the notes added below the slide? Ooh, I really like that someone asked this. It really depends on the screen reader user. So what's really important to remember is I can't speak for everything that a screen reader can do, but screen reader users are going to be just like users of other technology. You're going to have some people that know the basics, and you're going to have some people that are super users. So someone who you know, if a native screen reader has been using one their entire life, might know to navigate to the notes section. They might know those keyboard commands to really get around everywhere. But someone who's a novice screen reader user might not. And so it becomes a little tricky when we get so focused on what assistive technology can and cannot do, because part of it is also the user and how experienced the user is with the assistive technology. And so that's, you know, even today, I can't speak for everything that a screen reader can do because, you know, I'm below novice level. It's not a technology that I use daily and am trained in to answer some of these questions. So I kind of default when I design things to try to keep it as simple and clean as possible and not worry about complicating my design in hopes that all screen reader users can find and kind of navigate complex presentation. I don't, which maybe answers your question, maybe doesn't. I guess it's kind of relying on the KISS principle, right? Keep it simple, silly dance. So, and then there was a question: can the DAT toolbar, what was that called? The document accessibility toolbar, be added to the PowerPoint ribbon? To my knowledge, no. It's specific for document accessibility toolbar, so it works in Word. But I've not heard of anything similar for PowerPoint. And the accessibility checker is located under the File tab, so Alt-F, and you can tab through to check for issues, and then check accessibility, which is the keyboard command A. And it's the same location as it would be in Word. And so let's see, final question. Smart Art does not show in the outline. Correct. So if someone is using Smart Art, am I thinking that you have to use the trick with hidden text? Oh, I'm not too certain what that means. And then again, I don't use Smart Art, so I'm not sure. I will send resources on Smart Art out when I send out the recording. But we are over time, and I will just be rambling without much value if I try to answer. So thank you all for attending, and if anyone has anything that they want to add or any tips or tricks they're aware of, we welcome you to share those. Otherwise, I'll gather up some extra resources based on the questions that you all asked today, and I'll send them out with the recording of today's webinar, and look forward to talking or seeing, hearing, or not, meeting with you all again next week, where I think we're talking about accessible email. So, thanks everyone.